Hello, and welcome to Books in the World. I'm your host, Kathleen Murphy. Books in the World is an interview show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center and the Cape Media Center. The Writers Center was established over 60 years ago and sponsors a 4-day writers conference every summer on Cape Cod. Books in the World has been broadcast continuously for 45 years, making it the longest-running program of its kind in the United States. The goal of this program is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communication media. Today, we are delighted to welcome Margaret McMullan and talk about her latest book, Where the Angels Lived. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so pleased to have you on the show.
I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah. Where the Angels Lived is a Sarton Women's Book Award finalist and a winner of the 2020 Award for Nonfiction from the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters. Margaret is the author of 9 award-winning books, including In My Mother's House and Aftermath Lounge. Her work has appeared in many newspapers and magazines, including USA Today, The Washington Post, The Huffington Post, Los Angeles Times, The Chicago Tribune, and many more. She received a National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship and a Fulbright professorship in Hungary to research this book, Where the Angels Lived. I thoroughly enjoyed this engaging memoir. Scenes from Margaret and her family's adventures in Hungary are full of sadness, tension, joy. Her descriptions are vivid and haunting. She has helped me think about the generational impact of the Holocaust by showing how it affected the lives of its descendants, both descendants of the victims' families and descendants of the perpetrators. And I am so excited to have this opportunity to talk to her today. So welcome again, Margaret.
Well, my gosh, thank you, Kathleen. That was a really generous and thoughtful introduction. And I have to say, you can't always expect for an interviewer to have read the book and read it so well, too. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. So you said the book. So we should probably start with describing the book so people all can know what we're talking about. So give me an overview of Where the Angels Lived.
So Where the Angels Lived is about my search for an unknown relative named Richard Engel de Jánosis, a relative I never knew about and never knew that my mother knew about. And he was murdered in the Holocaust at Mauthausen concentration camp. So I set off for Hungary to research this man and discover basically all of the other relatives I never knew about who died in the Holocaust. And it became sort of this universal remembering of not only Richard and my family, but all members of the human race who died in the Holocaust. So it became a bigger project than I had expected it to be.
Yeah, because you found a lot about Richard, whom we're going to call Ricard, because we found that's one of the things you found out was that Ricard is actually how his name was originally assigned to him. You know, he was baptized as Ricard.
Yeah, that's actually a moment in the book, but yeah, we can hold off on that.
Yeah, but you found out about a lot of your ancestors in much more detail than you had known before you began this research and this trip to Hungary.
Yes.
In this book, you share so many powerful personal experiences. Right from the start, I was totally hooked. Can you talk about when you first visited Yad Vashem, which is the Museum of Remembrance in Jerusalem, and your interaction with the archivist?
Yeah, that was the beginning. So I was there in Israel as a writer for this writers project. It was a really great experience. I was invited there with other writers to basically be with people from different religions, and then meet with them and maybe get inspired to write something. Great gig. So one of the days was set aside to visit Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. And I went straight back to the library, the archives, and typed in my mother's name. to back up a little, I kind of knew the broad strokes of my mother's life. She was born in Vienna, Austria. She was raised Catholic, though her father was Jewish. He converted to Catholicism in 1938, thinking that it would save his family. It did not. The Nazis came in, they were threatened, and basically one by one they got out.
Right.
So I knew that about my mother, but she also was raised to basically not look back into her past, think forward, become American. And she was so grateful to America for saving her family and her life that her way of giving back was to join the CIA. And that basically instilled even more her secrecy. So when I was growing up, I didn't know much about my mother's past. And I even wrote a novel sort of imagining my way into my mother.
Yes, I
And
was hoping that you would mention that.
yeah,
In my mother's house,
in
right?
my mother's house.
Right.
And I wrote that novel. This is sort of the interesting tale of research too. Yad Vashem was being built while I was writing in my mother's house. And I didn't have an email account when I was writing in my mother's house. That wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So I was dealing with fax and basically going to libraries and that kind of thing. And
You were doing old school research.
old school, which I love.
Well,
And it was much more conducive to basically making up things in an intelligent, researched way. The surprise is the things that I imagined and made up turned out to be true. So back to Yad Vashem, when I typed my mother's name into the database, up popped this name Richard or Ricard, which I didn't know how to pronounce. It was just Richard. And it just had this few number of facts, what his name was, where he was from, Pécs, Hungary, in the Baranya district, and also that he perished in Mauthausen concentration camp. And so I pressed print, went to the archivist's desk to get the printout, and she looked at it and said, "No one has ever called this man's name down before. No one has ever asked about him. You're responsible for him now." And I'm like, excuse me?
yeah, I get chills when you said it. It's reminding me of when I read it, and I get chills just thinking about it. So powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised Catholic, but I also majored in college for religious studies. I was very drawn to Judaism and Buddhism and other religions. It just fascinated me. So I understand honoring a man who I didn't know. I get it. I'm from the South. All we do is talk about our dead. So it's just, but at the same time, I was also teaching, and I give assignments. I don't take them, and I'm like, yeah. But then at the same time, I was crying over a man I never knew.
Yes, it was like
Yeah.
his death was new to you. It was
Strangest thing.
yeah, it was like a fresh cut.
Yeah.
And she slid the paper over to you, telling
Yeah.
you what you had to research.
What I had to do. So there's this paper, basically, you need to fill out this victim form and find out what he did, where he worshipped, what his mother's maiden name was, where he was when he was arrested. Are you kidding me? Right. So I took the way I took it, the paper, and she put it neatly into a folder, and she's like, okay, now mail it back. Because when you mail it back, he will be in with the other victims who are now known. Right. And that was basically, it's the wall of remembrance.
And so when you're leaving this setting, you walk into the wall of remembrance, and what do you see?
And I see all of the people with their pictures too, and I didn't know what this man looked like. I didn't know how to get a picture because I knew my mother had nothing. She didn't even have anything from her own childhood, as they, had left in the night. So seeing these pictures of all the victims of the Holocaust that were there, and their stories. You know, you can look them up. I mean, it's just so moving. I don't see how anybody can go in that room, and it's circular too. So you're surrounded literally by these people.
Yes, and it's underground, and
Yeah.
it would survive bombing, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is such a powerful statement to memory and to the importance of remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so this mission that was thrust upon you is threaded through your memoir because it haunts you.
It does. It did. It still does. And it's funny because through the research, and you mentioned all the angels in the book, people kept bringing me facts and sometimes pictures. So I have these pictures now, and I have in our hall my sort of own hall of remembrance now with all the pictures of the fallen and the murdered and family.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic. People
Yeah.
that you didn't know, and now they're
Yeah.
hanging on pictures in your wall, on your
Yeah.
walls.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Yeah.
It was a remarkable journey that I never, I didn't know Hungarian. So that
And
was
that's a
another
very
challenge.
difficult language
Yeah.
that it has an affinity. Yeah, I met people that had been assigned there and they were like, it's obtuse. It's very,
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Again.
you dove right in. So you were so brave to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. But it was, I always felt like I had to do it. And I don't know how you are when you start a writing project, but it was never like, oh, la, 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 la. You know, I guess today I'll write about sunsets or something like that. I always felt like I was on a mission. I did not know what this was. I thought that I could research my way, just like in my mother's house. I thought I could research my way into Richard and Richard's life and time. And in my mind, I was going to write a novel because I just didn't think that I would ever get enough facts to write a factual account. Yeah.
I love that. That's great. I'm sorry, I'm whispering. I need to be talking. I'm just reacting. I just
It's
love that. That's
amazing. I
fantastic. Yeah.
think I whispered for 3 years
Yeah.
because it felt holy.
Yeah.
This,
Yeah, I can see
yeah.
that. I can see how it would be. It makes me think of my next question, which is, you are actually in these places. So in Jerusalem, when you first discovered, you're looking at a computer, but you're in Jerusalem. You're surrounded by all of that history. And then you live in the very home. You walk by the very houses of your ancestors in Pécs, Hungary. You even go to the concentration camp where your ancestor passed. So can you describe how physically being in a place is so much different than reading about it in a book or just doing research?
Yeah. And for me, it's crucial to be in the place, and place is important for me as a writer, and as a human being. But for this particular project, I had no idea how important it was going to be. When we went to Pécs, and I took my husband and our 15-year-old son there as well for half a year. And when we got there, I really did expect to see a gloomy, dark sort of shell of a city that was war torn in my mind, bullet ridden, you know.
Wow.
But it was bright,
Yeah.
sunny, Mediterranean like.
Beautiful.
No war damaged at all, which was another kind of historical revelation to me. They surrendered very easily.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. There's
there
a
was no
reason why.
fight. Yeah, so there was a reason why there was beauty. And it was also a cultural center, or kind of a mecca when we got there, and it was sort of cleaned up. And I found out that the town square, Chechnya Square, had been covered with tombstones from cemeteries, because I guess they couldn't, right after the war when they were remaking the squares, they didn't have enough concrete or something, so they used tombstones. So like the week before we got there, they'd gotten rid of all the tombstones and like paved it with this new bright white pavement. And people were a little daunted by it because it was dark before. And you just think, oh my gosh, they were walking over the names of their dead.
That's amazing.
And
Amazing.
you just, there was that. And there was also the fact that I walked past these buildings not knowing their history. And only until I shared what I was researching with my own students,
Right.
they started leading me to Jewish cemeteries, which were really hard to find.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other story in the book.
Yeah.
But also the buildings of my ancestors. And they were the ones who said, oh, well, you've got to go to the synagogue. And I said, okay. And once I found it finally, I'm like, it's huge. And then I go there and there was a plaque with the names of all of my people. And that was the first time I saw Richard, his name written down outside of Yad Vashem, and it had the little accent over the A, and the pronunciation in Hungarian is Ricard.
Wow.
And it was the first time I saw his name. And then when I sat in that synagogue in the pew and saw graffiti, very new graffiti etched in ballpoint pen, and it was in German, but the translation was, and I wrote about this in the book, boils soap out of Jews. And that's when I realized this is not a novel. And I'm in this too. I had no idea that it started taking shape because.
And these emotions, you had these emotions that were pulled up that in a novel, you normally have that a little bit of detachment, and you had, but instead you were struck by
shaking, crying. Oh my gosh, this was the wood that my great-great-grandfather harvested and built the synagogue with. And, and this is where my people worshiped. And there I'm reading that, and it just, and all around us, we saw swastikas, spray painted on synagogues and in the Jewish cemeteries and in buildings. They had a new prime minister, Viktor Orban, who had just been elected.
And is still there.
People were very hesitant when I asked about 1944 and what happened to all the Jews in Page, because it was emptied of Jews still. There were 14 in the town. There used to be 7,000. What do you want from us was kind of a response. Are you trying to get the buildings back? Do you want your property? You want money? It was a real, and then the whole George Soros business was just bizarre, So there was a real rush of anti-Semitism that, it was sort of unbelievable. It felt like 1944.
Right.
And so I realized this was the parallel universe, and the structure of that I saw this book, unfolding before me.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
And I didn't want to be in Richard's story. I just wanted it to be about him.
Yeah.
But I also felt the urgency.
Right. By reminding readers that, yes, this happened in the past, but here I am in present day writing about it. And
there's my 15-year-old son, also dealing with it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Which brings me to the next. So your son, your husband, you have this full body experience, full emotional experience. Your son's in the school, your husband's teaching at your son's school. And you'll talk about all of that in the book. So the three of you go on this journey, but you also take your mother and your father on this journey because you're Skyping with them back and forth. And she's learning things that are very uncomfortable for her or very uplifting, depending on what it is that you're talking about. So Tell me about that. Tell me how it was interacting with your parents, how that worked. And
Yeah. Well, they were back in the States near Chicago, and my father was going through chemotherapy. He had a brain tumor, cancer, and my mother was there helping, obviously. And so I was Skyping with them, talking with them, delivering this news to my mother. Here's what we saw today. And it felt really rude
yeah. Yeah,
to,
I can see that, like an
as a
emotional
daughter.
tornado. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know you're dealing with this with your husband, but guess what? Your
Yeah.
father never told you about this entire Hungarian Jewish family that
Right.
you left behind.
And they
And
had such influence and they had such power. It was a lovely thing to share with her, to that they did such good.
right,
That Adolf and that others of your ancestors worked so hard to employ people, to start businesses, to make, to build buildings in the town. I'm sorry, I'm taking.
no, no, I know, no. I mean, you're. I'm so glad you're saying this because I would have really liked them.
Yeah, you would
Yeah,
have. I
I
like them
completely
already. Yeah.
and I was so relieved because I'm like, oh my gosh, these people are crazy
Yeah.
and wild and a little bohemian. And Adolf, the big patriarch, was a little standoffish, but I really fell in love with Richard. Or Rickard. He would have been the uncle that I would have really, you know,
Gravitated to.
I really would have. He was kind of shy, soft spoken, but very determined,
Yeah.
moral, to a fault. And
And he had secrets and
he had
yeah.
secrets.
Yes. And
He
they'll
had a
have to read
love
the book to
life.
see it. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. Great character.
yeah.
I think Ricard should be in a movie. Personally,
I do too. I do too.
I think so.
Yeah, and this was one of the sort of accidents of research. And also, a lot of writers hold off, hold their material for the book. And one of the things that happened, after I had kind of collected all this information, and after I got back to the United States, stuff was happening that looked familiar. In other words, there was an immigration crisis and all this, and it looked the same thing that was happening in Hungary seemed to have been also happening in the United States. Authoritarians were everywhere, and the
Exactly.
campaign seemed to make United States more like Hungary, and that was very frightening to me. So I started writing about this in opinion pieces, and hesitantly, probably, a little bit, but when I got that information about this material out there, people started emailing me things. And that's when I found out about Richard's love story. This woman, from Eastern Europe, emailed me and said, "Is this Richard Engel de Jánosis, the man my great aunt always spoke about?" And that's how and I don't want to give away
Yep.
things from the book, but I had finished the book, and I basically had written the end of the single man story. And I had no idea that he had this love of his life. And she sent me photographs of them together, and it was just,
So
and
it
then
stopped the book.
it
It
stopped the
stopped the
book.
book. You had to go back and add him in. I did. It's seamless. I had no idea. I thought it was.
Well, I mean, that was a joy, and I'm still in contact with them, and she feels like we're family because they were so close.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
I
know.
love that.
I
I love
know.
that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, if I, well, I don't, the ifs and what's, but I mean, that is sort of the joy of writing, you just don't know where it's going to lead,
Yeah,
especially the memoir and
exactly.
research.
Exactly. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's full of angels. You had these people from Eastern Europe that were contacting you. Once you started writing these editorials, which are fabulous, you had all these people contacting you. But while you're in Paish and at the school, you had a lot of angels. Like you said, they were coming to you to offer you or help you figure out buildings and people and places to go and backstory, a lot of backstory. How are they now? Are you still in touch? I mean, it was just wonderful.
Yeah. And I love that you bring that up like that too, that there were angels in the book. That's just so wonderful. And I can never think or talk about where the angels live without thinking about my friend Renata and Zoli. And I mean, they were just incredible. And it was, again, an accident of meeting them. Renata taught at the high school, and she knows Russian and English and Hungarian, of course. So she could translate everything for me, which was unbelievable. So she, and she knew Hungary.
She dedicated a lot of time to your
Oh,
project. Really an angel. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
Zoli.
and Zoli knew German. He drove everywhere. And he also, his specialty was the history of coal in Hungary. So he knew all about the family's investments and interest in the coal mines, and knew
Talk
the
about
whole
falling in with the right
was
people.
incredible. It was
Yeah.
incredible. And when we did finally bring my mother back to visit, to see Hungary, she'd never been to Hungary. And when she came, she was looking at houses. She was ready to move there. She just loved it. And she loved speaking German again. I think, and that was just wonderful. She didn't know Hungarian. And German was a really difficult language for her after the war. She didn't like to hear it. She didn't like to speak it. It just didn't have great memories. And, that's her native tongue was Austrian, a subtle difference. But to hear her speak so fluently in German,
it must have been eye-opening for you. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, more so that for my son. This was a whole side to his grandmother. He had no idea.
Yeah. I mean,
and the Hungarians, they danced, and to see an older woman dancing in Hungary is quite the sight.
We are unfortunately nearing the end of our time. So I want you, if you could, comment on how do we get in touch with you and what's your next project and things like that.
You can find me at my website, www.margaretmcmullan.com, and my email address is there. I'm on Twitter, and Instagram, Facebook.
Great. And another project that you've got, you mentioned something about the Mississippi, yeah?
Yes, I just finished a young adult novel called Only Heaven Knows. And I keep changing the title. So, but my husband, my husband did this documentary about the Mississippi state flag coming down, and it became sort of a huge discussion about Confederate symbols. And when I was helping him with that documentary, I noticed so many young people protesting. And that really interested me, and I wanted to write a story about them and for them. And so this is about a girl named Heaven and her best friend Angel. I got another Angel, can't give it up. And they're basically trying to bring down a Confederate monument in their small town in Mississippi.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Yeah. That is great. Let me know when it comes out. Well, I want to know about it. That sounds wonderful. Very good. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I wish we had more time.
I know. Thank you. This has just been delightful. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, you'll find them through the CapeCodWritersCenter.org, through our Facebook page, and on YouTube. Thank you again for watching Books in the World.